didn't meet FDA standards, wasn't safe to consume for a child to put in their mouth. It had diethylene freaking glycol in it. That's antifreeze. Who in their right mind decides it's a good idea to put antifreeze in toothpaste? So that was obviously a big error. And where do you think it was manufactured?
Before we get started with the show, here's a quick word from our sponsor, Global Training Center. As trade compliance professionals, you want to make sure that your procedures and documentation are completed as correctly as possible to avoid any delays and possible fines. We provide a range of trade compliance courses that will fit your needs. From in-person or web training to recorded on-demand courses, we can train one or even thousands on your team through your learning platform or on our portal. We can even customize a private session for your team. Go to globaltrainingcenter.com to find out more.
Hey, folks, we're back for another show of Simply Trade, and we've got a special one. This is our Simply Trade Crimes series here. So this is going to be a good one. We've got a great guest that's coming on here in a minute, and it's like you got to hear a lot about Jen Diaz, and she is the last one we were talking about her background, but this one, she's got a crime for us. This is going to be a good one. So Lalo, I'm excited to get into this because this has been a great series. Everybody seems to like to think of somebody getting arrested and or convicted over some stupidity, usually what it comes down to. So what do you think, man?
No, yeah, I agree with you. It's the best part of it is this is the first time ever that we do this series, the crime show, without even knowing what the heck we're going to talk about.
That's true.
We usually get the case ahead of time, and we try to see what we can. But this is going to be truly. We say we're unscripted. This is even beyond unscripted. We don't even know what Jen's going to talk about. So we'll see. So Jen, go ahead. Thank you for coming back on. And yes, the last time you heard her, it was on the Folks episode. Lots of people were downloading that and listening to that. Thank you all for that. And we're excited for that and having her back for the crimes.
Awesome. It's always a pleasure to be with you guys. I feel like we're just always hanging out at a conference and I get to hang out at your podcast. So I can hang out with you guys forever. And the fun part about this was I didn't even know what I was going to talk about. So I actually have props for you today and lots of props and lots of stories. So in my stories, not everyone's going to jail, but we will talk about some criminal convictions as well. But lots of different stories of things that I've experienced over the last too many years in this fun, fabulous industry. So I'm going to take you back first to my first recall. This is toothpaste. Why do you think toothpaste? It's children's freaking toothpaste. Why do you think it was recalled?
It probably did not meet the Consumer Product Safety Commission's standards or the FDA's.
So when we think about toothpaste, we think about FDA for sure. And yes, you're thinking about kids for a CPSC, but didn't meet the FDA standards 1,000%, didn't meet FDA standards, wasn't safe to consume for a child to put in their mouth. It had diethylene freaking glycol in it. That's antifreeze. Who in their right mind decides it's a good idea to put antifreeze in toothpaste? So that was obviously a big error. And where do you think it was manufactured?
China.
China.
Shocking,
yeah.
Right? Like, that's a surprise here. So yes, we have China toothpaste. So this happened over 13 plus years ago, but I still keep it in my office in my wall of fame. So I've got all sorts of products there and all sorts of stories. But imagine one of my first FDA big recalls was getting toothpaste that had antifreeze in it off of the market. So children didn't digest it. And of course, where does this go? This is like dollar store toothpaste. It's the cheaper versions of the name brand itself. But we've done a lot of FDA recalls since. Over the pandemic. We were dealing with a lot of hand sanitizers. Did you see any of those stories for hand sanitizers?
I guess they took the slogan very literally, a glowing, bright smile. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I feel like dad joke insert here, right?
All right. So here's a quick question for you, though, Jen. Is by chance, if you look at the ingredients on that, was it listed?
Come on. No, no.
Oh, okay.
I mean, nobody's crazy enough to list it. I mean, you have other crazy ingredients within here, but nobody's saying diethylene glycol, like, hey, who wants some antifreeze in your toothpaste? It's a new great ingredient to get a bigger, brighter smile, says Lalo, you know? Like,
So that comes back to the scenario that even if you're a consumer and you're looking at the ingredients,
right, you would never
you're at
know.
risk. So this comes to a scenario where the FDA obviously had to have taken some samples when they did an inspection. And lo and behold, so this is one where the agency and your tax dollars actually are working in identifying something that would be nefarious for
which is
somebody to
similar
use.
exactly to what happened in the hand sanitizer scenario that we dealt with over the pandemic. So we're still working on a few of those. We had many FDA recalls of hand sanitizer where let's pretend, Andy, you're the manufacturer and you're supposed to have good manufacturing practices, no different from the toothpaste to the hand sanitizer to any particular item you're manufacturing. Your job is supposed to be to validate the raw material ingredients that you're getting in to your facility to make sure that, if Lalo sells you ethanol, you're supposed to be able to test that and make sure it really is ethanol, well, and in our, for example, so ethyl alcohol in one of my hand sanitizers, that's our number one ingredient. It's supposed to be ethyl alcohol, right? So Lalo's selling it to you, but little do you know, Lalo's nefarious. He's a bad guy. So instead, he found cheap methanol. He substituted the ethanol for methanol, put it in, and sold you a huge amount of methanol as the ingredient. So now you utilized the methanol instead of the ethyl alcohol, instead of the ethanol, put it into your hand sanitizer and made it, and never did another test, for example, thereafter. So we have many different scenarios of that where, for example, Andy, you test your final product and your final product had whatever percentage of alcohol and you said all is well. And you didn't necessarily have a test specifically for ethanol versus methanol because you didn't think somebody as bad as Lalo would have existed to actually substitute ethanol for methanol because that's just a horrible thing to do. But they're horrible, nefarious people trying to make a buck, So this was the height of everyone wanting their hand sanitizer. And it's no different than the toothbrush scenario in that what are the protocols that you, the manufacturer, have in place to make sure that nobody can take advantage of you, to screw you and to screw your supply chain, because now your final product of hand sanitizer is not usable. And then, of course, you simultaneously have people that, for whatever ungodly reason, decide it's a good idea to drink hand sanitizer to get their alcohol in. So lots of issues stemmed from that as well. But the core takeaways from any of these are it's really, really easy to order a product from whatever manufacturer online or anywhere, especially these days. But how do you know the quality of what you're buying and what you're bringing in? And now you, as the importer, are taking on more and more risks. So there is potential criminal liability in all sorts of scenarios. If we think back to the cat food, dog food that had poison ingredients within it, and God forbid, it's like if anybody messes with my Lucky, that's it. Like all hands off. Like that's it for me specifically as a dog lover and owner. And how many people love their pets? If you gave your pet a contaminated product that hurt them, like how do you forgive yourself as an owner, and how do you not want to get back at that particular horrible importer? So in some instances, importers actually bear criminal liability for these depending on who winds up getting sick and what the intent was. Were you in on it? But in this instance, now Lalo's overseas. How does anybody get to Lalo? And Lalo, of course, is the nicest guy and he would never do something that horrible. But the point is, the Lalos of the world in this example, it's the horrible part that I see is when I was communicating with HSI, for example, for one of these cases, I was like, why can't we think back and more so target the Lalos in this instance? Like, my guy for sure had a GMP issue, and my Andy didn't. We have a GMP malfunction. I get that. We have lots of things we have to do to correct, to have corrective actions, and to go back and to figure out there are a lot of things that we did wrong and a lot of root causes that we can come up with and a lot of corrective actions on that side. But there's no intent to screw people. There was no intent to do something horrific in Andy's end when he made the product, for example. But the Lalos, he purposely substituted an ingredient. He purposely lied, cheated, stole, and got money for an ingredient he purported to be something else. That's a different story, but I think it's pretty sucky in terms of the liability importers have at the end of the day. And then the raw material guys, it's like, how do we get back to him?
Well, to your point, though, all right, so let's stop. So in that scenario, folks, is you are importing product, and especially if it's some kind of a liquid, a chemical, a paste, something, that's going to be consumed or whatever else. The scenario is you, even with your samples and all of that ahead of time prior to manufacturing is one thing, but the point being is you need to have an ongoing regiment that you just randomly sample your own products before the agencies do, because you want to see that stuff and make sure you are getting what you're paying for. And so all that. So that's what I'm hearing
Andy,
in
I
what you're
think
looking
you
at.
read my top 10 tips. Tip number 1, request a sample. Let's get to know who you're buying from. Let's get to know what their process is. Let's get to know your product. Let's figure out who regulates us and what rules we need to follow. Like if we really were extra special diligent in either of those scenarios, we would know who our manufacturer is. We would know who all our raw material providers are. We would have the right testing in place. We would have samples. We'd have test results. I mean, it takes a lot to import. It's not an easy task for anyone. And I think a lot of people take for granted how easy it is to get a commercial invoice from someone and to book cargo on a vessel and to say, I'm ready to go, without necessarily thinking of all the due diligence and compliance that really should come hand in hand with that importation.
I will say this. I had a client a while back that was importing some goods out of a country that, they had been working on a deal for literally 18 months, and they were working through, and then they pulled me in at the ninth hour, and I'm going in the first week, I was just like, are you sure this is, playing out like it should be? I said, I'm seeing some red flags there. Oh no, we've got 2 law firms involved, and we've got all these people who've been doing it for 18 months. No, everybody's credible. I'm like, okay. So I kept on digging, and I kept pulling back, if you will, the layers of an onion. I'm going, something just isn't quite right. And I said, have you already spent some money? Yeah, this is an initial thing, is a multi-million-dollar deal. The first shipment was a test shipment. They had sent $350,000 to a neutral party. And I said, okay, have you got a letter of credit with this? Because I said, there's some things here you need to do. Long story short, I said, this product needs to be transferred to an agent, if you will, at the origin before it's loaded, and you test it out and make sure you're getting and sure enough, it was nothing anywhere close to what it was. Expired goods. It was, and then they tested out some other, and it wasn't exactly what it was supposed to be. And I said, and it took them probably 9 months to get that $350,000 back, but they were very, very lucky. And I said, but you need to shut that down. So the point being is, in that one, they had seen pictures of the product. They'd done all this stuff. And I said, you need to transfer that to a neutral party. And I said, yeah, it's going to cost you probably a few $100 or $1,000 for this deal. But I said, it's going to save you if it's legitimate. Okay, fine. If it's not, and sure enough, it was not. So
For some on the phone or with us and watching, there are great service providers like the Bureau Veritases or SGSs of the world that provide those auditing services pre-exportation. So they're neutral third parties. You can give them any testing requests that you have, and they will work up their review per your particular request. So it's another thought besides hiring your own personal QC person to do your own qualifications. If you don't have that kind of budget, another thought process is to have a third party neutral come into the facility and have your specific specifications, write up a report prior to you accepting to receive those particular goods. I love it. in many worlds, that would save a lot of people a whole lot of money. All right, ready to play the next game?
Ready?
Why was this a problem? So I'm going to try to bring it close. What do you see?
Well, it's a little toy motorcycle, right?
I can't answer because I think I know the answer. I think you showed us that.
Oh, it's got some candies in it, but it's got some small parts to it that could be swallowed by a kid.
Good job. Good job. And who cares about the small parts?
Oh, well, that's the CPSC.
Nicely done. So you have the Consumer Product Safety Commission really pissed off because the handlebar can pop right off and be a choking hazard for a child, for sure. And then candies you saw inside. Who regulates candies? That's easy. FDA. So now FDA has crazy fun rules. So one is the colorants. How many people knew that if you want to use a food coloring in a food, it has to come from an approved color source? Otherwise, if it's not from a certified batch, you have no ability to use it. Most people don't know that and don't necessarily think of that when it comes to food. So this was a client's first importation, and there was a threat of jail from CPSC, but very, very lucky because these weren't distributed. Nobody actually died. Nobody actually choked. Nobody got hurt with this particular item, but it's a perfect example of a first importation gone wrong for numerous reasons. So one is this client had previously purchased from domestic distributors, and it was super easy because somebody else was the importer. Somebody else took the liability. The goods were already domesticated, and when they purchased it, they were able to just sell domestically themselves, and life was easy. But what do people see? Margins, right? But wait a minute, I'm paying you so much. I can get this at a better price if I just import myself. What's the big deal? Importing's so simple. This poor importation wound up spending the next 2 years of his life dealing with different elements. So one, we have a seizure, and we have a seizure from CBP for an underlying FDA issue and CPSC issue and IPR issue on top of that. So the next fun thing to talk about is intellectual property rights. So on the cute little motorcycle are all sorts of logos on here. And now the fun part is, how easy is it for you to put a logo on a toy and not think about how you actually have to have an authorization to use a logo that you didn't design, that's not yours. So one importation can have 3 different agencies yelling at you for 3 different reasons and 3 different potential sets of consequences. So when it comes to the CPSC side, it was really handled via CBP, and same thing with FDA. They could have had a separate FDA import alert on top of this, and they were lucky that they didn't. But we have had instances where clients have had issues with FDA and not complying with FDA rules in some way, shape, or form. And FDA has the ability to put you on the blacklist, to put you on an import alert list, and to screen any future importations to make life as miserable as possible to make sure that you're compliant thereafter. But from the CBP side, CPSC's letter is never a nice one when there's a potential issue, because CPSC has a job to protect children. So CPSC's letter is, there's potential criminal liability out there. So imagine your first importation and you're getting yelled at. So you've got notices of FDA action saying FDA is not happy and they're going to refuse the product. CPSC is not happy, threatening potential criminal liability, and CBP is seizing the goods anyways, and now citing to these other agencies rules that you're breaking because Customs has the ability to do that. So now we have the seizure case that obviously nobody's winning. So I mean, I put on a cape and win a lot of crazy cases, but this one, there's no way to win this. Like, getting this back is going to be futile. But what we care about is criminal liability, and what we also care about is the penalties thereafter. So in some instances, we've been really fortunate, and Customs doesn't give you all of the secret sauce, but to put it this way, when you, Andy, let's go back to you, and your manufacturing company has whatever name, pick a name, that name itself you want to protect and ensure that that's yours, that Lalo can't steal it, because Lalo is going to be my bad guy throughout. So now if Lalo wants to steal that name, what do you do to protect it? So most people think of the United States Patent and Trademark Office when you have a trademark or a logo you want to protect. So we do a lot of trademark searches, because the first thing you want to know, and we've had clients that have this instance, right? I put a logo on something and I brand the hell out of it and I start importing it and I'm ready to go. And oops, I didn't do a trademark search, and oops, oh, Andy, you're not going to be so happy with me. I'm using your brand without your permission. Then we're going to have a private dispute thereafter. So we see a lot of that. But now the second step that most people don't think about is going to customs after you have a successful USPTO registration. So I've proven to USPTO that I have the rights to this particular logo. It's mine, and I'm telling the world they can't use it. So Lalo, you can't steal my logo, my design, my name. It's mine, however I decided to protect it. And then I go to customs and I say, customs, I'm recording my registered trademark with you, customs. You have to have the active USPTO registration to record it with customs. But now the sexiest part about this for customs is, one, they only charge $190 for 10 years worth of protection, which is crazy. Good luck firing a private investigator for that. It's not possible. So now customs acts as a policeman at the border. So going back to the motorcycle, customs is policing Andy's brand, making sure the mean Lalos of the world don't bring in a fake, a counterfeit version of it. So customs has the ability to seize the motorcycle, but thereafter they can issue penalties for the MSRP as if they were genuine. So we have so many stories about the penalties thereafter and how crazy that winds up becoming. And that was the story for this particular motorcycle as well. So we've got the seizure for all of those underlying reasons. Then we have the penalty case thereafter. And we were very, very lucky because it turned out to not have a criminal implication, because thankfully there was no actual damage. Nobody actually got hurt in that instance, right? Nobody had the ability to utilize the motorcycle and to choke on it, to have an instance where there was actual damage. But imagine that being a first importation. How do you get over that? Then either you never import again, which in this instance, that's pretty much what happened. So it's a great way to scare somebody and straight out of importing, and or you wind up with an instance where somebody really has to sit down and do their homework before they ever take this on again, right? So there's so much due diligence that wasn't done in so many different directions there.
This totally falls under the what were they thinking of category. I mean, I think everything you said so far does, but this one, I just feel like, what is their excuse of thinking that they can put, I'm not going to say the manufacturer, the brand name, but X brand name, when they don't even own it. Like, really, like somebody, like, again, what were they thinking? Like, I don't know. It's beyond me, but
it happens every day. So I want you to think about it in a human context for us as consumers. How many times have you been on Amazon, Temu, whatever website where you're on an e-commerce platform trying to get something to your house in a couple of days? Do you really ask for license agreements? Do you really ask for authorization to use the logo? Like, if I'm buying a Nike shirt online, am I getting it from the Nike store or a third-party seller? Does that third-party seller really have the rights? Like, anyone can have this happen to them. Like, literally one of my worst fears, not that I want to say this out loud, is like getting a seizure notice, like in the mail from some crap I ordered on freaking Amazon. It's very easy for any consumer to be duped, but that's different than a commercial importation, where you would assume that if somebody's spending $100,000 or whatever that amount is on a commercial importation, that they may have done their homework before buying that particular item. Like, I feel like the consumers on the online platforms, in my humble opinion, the online platform should have some accountability there in that instance for who they allow on their platform to sell. And that platform has a much better chance of getting a license agreement before a consumer does. The online platform has a much better chance of checking the reputable nature of the particular sellers before any consumer has the ability to vet any online seller before you make that purchase. It's never going to happen. But in an instance where you have a commercial importation, if you don't do your homework and know who you're buying from, what it is you're buying, what agencies regulate you, what compliance requirements you actually have, and what due diligence you should have entailed before buying it, it's insane.
Well, here's the thing that I guess as you're looking at it, is like, so let's talk about that for just a quick second. Is that a company that is looking at, offering a product here? You could be a small company, you could be a larger one, whatever, but it's okay to sit there and look at it. It's like, hey, look, I see this little toy or whatever. It's got mints in it. It's fine. I'm dealing with it. That's great. Hey, can we do this and import it ourselves? Even if you're buying from a domestic source, one of the things that you should be looking at is the product that I've got. Let's say it was a U.S. manufacturer. The CPSC has jurisdiction not only over, imported goods, they have jurisdiction over domestic goods. So one of the things as you're talking about doing your homework is, hey, I like this. This is like a cool little widget, whatever the case may be. People seem to like it. Okay, if you're going to sell that now, the scenario there is like, okay, what's your homework? Well, you just say, if it's something that's consumed or whatever, or it's going to be around, it could be designed for adults, but if it's sitting there, it has small parts to it, then it's like, a child could take that. That looks like a toy. It's something I'm going to, and they'll, how kids put stuff in their mouth, all that kind of stuff. So again, doing your homework means you need to check that out, because you're taking on a liability that in the event something happens, are you prepared for that? And to handle that. So, you do your due diligence. That's part of it. If you're importing it, you need to also go through and say, all right, let me see a sample of this thing. Let's look at it. Now you run it through your legalities of the due diligence, your compliance, and all that kind of thing, like you were saying, right?
For sure. I want to share just another on the IPR side. There are people that do go to jail for the sale of counterfeit goods. So CBP released the 2021 records, and they have IPR seizure statistics that they release typically on a yearly basis. But in 2021, 27,000 seizures. If I even handle 1,000 of those, I'm a happy camper. MSRP is $3.3 billion, representing an increase of over 152%. So customs is getting smarter. I know we've talked about AI, and I know you guys have as well. So customs is utilizing more sophisticated algorithms to figure out who to stop, when to stop, where to stop, and so on. But the other important aspect there is not only do you have the seizures, we don't get all of the penalty stats tied to just IPRs. We don't know exactly what they collect per se, but you have arrests. They've arrested 388 individuals and obtained 155 indictments and 100 convictions strictly related to IPR crimes, which is important to note. So we have a lot of individuals that we wind up representing. So, for example, we had a youngin in school, in college, and I have a side hustle selling whatever, right? So that's my favorite. And then what due diligence do youngins in college necessarily do, depending on the person? In this instance, none. So they bought fake Cartier watches for whatever purpose. And then the fun excuse is, but everybody sells these on Insta. I mean, they're all over the place, right? So that's my favorite. But everybody else is doing it. What's the biggie? It's like, why should I be singled out? Everybody else is speeding. How dare you just catch me, right? So then the fun instance is customs obviously issues their seizure notice. They track and trace and find. Now, grand scheme of things, how many of these happened before or after is a whole nother story in terms of how many shipments actually went through. But that's for a privilege conversation. But then the seizure notice is like, oh, all right, so I got caught this time. Who cares? Which is my least favorite response, because what do you think the bad guys do? Do you think they sit there and fight for their goods back? What bad guys actually, put their name forward and have anything to do with it? But in this instance, the seizure notice is toilet paper, fine. But the next notice you get is a penalty notice, because the seizure has to be finalized from an administrative standpoint for customs, for customs to then have the ability to issue the penalty. And the penalty, we can call those F penalties, because that's the part of the reg statute that we're talking about, is for the MSRP, as if the Cartier is a real freaking Cartier with the really pretty diamonds on it. That could be 20 grand a bracelet in some instances. They're crazy, crazy numbers in some instances there. So now you're talking about almost $1 million penalty. So that notice comes to your door. And best yet, this is my other favorite horror story. It's for you as an individual because you are not smart enough to register a entity for your side hustle. So you're doing this as an individual. So you have personal liability and $1 million penalty notice from customs. Hallelujah. What do you know? You finally woke up. Now customs has caught your attention, right? Because if that doesn't catch your attention, what will as an individual, right? Because I lost a few, $100 or whatever of my fakey bracelets, no biggie. But now I have this monster penalty notice to me as an individual. So those are instances unfortunately we see a lot of, and I see a lot of people getting duped at all levels. But then the fun part is I call them innocent schmucks, because how innocent are they and how schmucky are they, right? So this is due diligence not being done. Did you not know it was a fake Cartier? Did you not know it was a fake whatever the brand is, right? So we see a lot of those in customs press releases, depending on what the trends are. So Cartier was a hot trend for the last few years. We saw a lot of those seizures and penalties in relation to customs enforcing those. So customs is smart enough to pick up on those trends and look for those particular items as well. So it's important to note in terms of IPR, at a minimum, check the sample, specifically ask the manufacturer for no markings, no branding. Put that on your purchase order, make your request clear, ask for a sample that's demonstrative of your particular request, check the goods at origin prior to exportation to the United States so you can validate. And then you shouldn't have this particular issue. It shouldn't be I didn't order that. Like, did you validate in any way that that's what you actually ordered? And then if you're, for whatever reason, utilizing brands, how do you have authorization to do so? Are you requesting licenses? And if it's not yours, then come up with your own damn design and let's help you protect it. I don't understand why there's so much of the fakey stuff going on when I just want everyone to be ingenuitous and come up with their own freaking thoughts and your own designs and your own markings and protect your own creativity instead of copying other people, right?
Well, that's a good point. You mentioned it earlier in that example where there are so many side hustles, as they call them now, that people are advertising, and they're just, they're making all this money and everything else. And there are people that are beginning to literally take some of these and say, all right, let me check it out. And lo and behold, they're not valid. And it takes just some other deal that you're going to spend, $25, $100, whatever it is, $200 for a training course on how to do it or whatever it is. And all you're doing is feeding the person of that particular side hustle. All that to say, in this particular case, and there's a lot of them where, hey, I can be an affiliate seller. Well, okay, now you're an affiliate of somebody else's site. So if somebody orders something from your website and in the background it goes and it connects up with somebody else's site, that then they do the pick and pack and ship it to your end customer, you don't even have to touch anything. Well, guess what? You are now assuming some liability because it was sold from your site for the quality and whatever else, or whoever these people are that are supplying that. So have you vetted whoever's manufacturing that product? So, under that scenario, if there is somebody that is on the restricted or denied parties listing and they're manufacturing these products or whatever, and you happen to link up to whatever they're offering, and now that is being shipped in and that product comes in, customs happens to see it, stops it, whatever. It's your website that did the sale on it. Would I have, let's say if I'm selling that as an e-retailer, would I have liability for doing business with somebody that's on the restricted or denied parties and I don't know who they are?
Now you're paying them, right? So now guess what? Your bank account could be seized by OFAC. How fun is that? Because we've had that conversation with many clients. So I woke up yesterday and I had $1 million in the bank, and I woke up today and I don't have $1 million in the bank. And when I call the bank, they say, yeah, I can't tell you much, buddy. Sorry. those are conversations we've legitimately had, and it can take a year, sometimes 2 years, to get that money back. It's not an instantaneous I can get it back right away. So we've had an instance with Venezuela sanctions, for example, where the underlying transaction was actually a valid transaction, but now you've got to explain it to the bank, you've got to explain it to OFAC, you've got to get OFAC give you a license for it, then go back to the bank and go back, and first you have to figure out what the hell happened, what agency was involved to begin with that actually took the funds, then communicate with them. So, I mean, you're talking about a project in and of itself for sure. But now, what can you do on the due diligence front in advance? Know who you're getting in bed with, know who you're actually partying with, know who you're buying from. Knowing your manufacturers are step one, just the same as knowing your product. If you don't know the parties involved and where goods are coming from and where money is flowing to, there are people that get caught up in money laundering or whatever crazy scams in that instance as well. It's like, oh, I'm buying it from Lalo, but he doesn't really want the money. He wants me to send it via Andy, via whatever crazy track. It's like, what about asking questions at that point? What about not just paying? What about, let's talk about this for a second. Why am I not paying you, Lalo? Oh, because I have a third party in Iran. No biggie, just pay them. Like, wait, can we talk about that for a second? Can we say no?
Oh, the other one is just pay me in a Bitcoin.
Oh, that's good too. Yeah. Yeah. We had a client get defrauded by somebody pretending to be a surety and asking for collateral via Bitcoin and via whatever those crazy currencies are. And
cryptocurrency.
Yeah, cryptos, exactly. And they were crazy enough to spend it because they were, in a huff and a puff because they had an anti-dumping matter and needed a whole lot of collateral and were freaking out about sureties. And there was no common sense in any way, shape, or form. Didn't, God forbid, ask their lawyer about what they thought about this and whether this was legitimate or not. So I went back to customs and I said, do you realize your surety page that lists your sureties just has the names and the codes for the surety? Wouldn't it be awesome if you maybe just added the website so people could go to a reputable source and maybe, God forbid, add the phone number or a contact. I'm not going to go crazy, but I mean, maybe even the website. So somebody, if you do a Google search, you could find bad guys out there that are pretending to be one of those entities. And they're pretty smart. They know the right terms to utilize as well. So going to the export violations, because I thought some of those were good, and well, I've got one more on the import side actually. This is what we're seeing the most of post 2018. So this one first, and then the last one will end with the export one, is undervaluing. And we're seeing this as probably the number one thing we are seeing is somebody coming to us saying, my Chinese supplier told me, no biggie. I know China tariffs are horrible. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you 2 invoices, one for customs and one to pay me.
Oh my gosh. That should have been a red flag right there, just off the chart.
You would think. And you're seeing a lot of this, and there are a lot of Department of Justice investigations and ongoing cases, and a lot of people have gone to jail for this as well, and there's a lot of restitution that's being paid and a lot of settlements, lots of cases. We've got a blog on this that I'm happy to share with you guys to post, where undervaluation, it's a crime. Did you know? Let's talk about it, and let's make sure everybody realizes what's interesting is the perspective that I've heard from clients is, but the way it was presented to me just made it seem like it was so normal and so commonplace and so not a big deal. Like everybody's doing it. This is my favorite, but everybody's labeling it incorrectly. Is everybody really doing it? No, only the bad guys are doing it. This is not a good practice. Let's start there. First of all, the value is the price you actually pay, not the price that your supplier is telling you could have potentially paid. If it can't be validated with a bank statement and or the actual payment, how does this work? You're never going to pass an audit. How do you think you're going to get away with this in any way, shape, or form?
To that extent, let me give an example to folks here of what we're talking about as far as undervaluing, and you run with 2 invoices. It would be the equivalent. Let me shift another scenario here. This would be the equivalent of you making, let's say, you made $100,000 income in a year, but you're only declaring 75,000 with the IRS. At some point, that's going to catch up to you. at some point there are transactions on. Do you think the IRS is going to come back and go, oh, everybody's doing it, no problem? No, they're going to come back and hammer you hard. Well, same thing. You're making a declaration to customs off of a value of, let's say, $5,000. And then I've got to pay the vendor, and I'm going to write or have a financial transaction of, let's say, $10,000. Well, wait a minute, where'd this other $5,000? What happened there? And you look at it, there's an audit trail in that. Or if you break it up into multiple payments, okay, fine. When customs comes through and they look at that, don't think for a second you wouldn't get caught, because that's going to happen. It's like whatever you're declaring to the government, it better be accurate, because that's a formal declaration.
Yeah, I will say what we're seeing quite a bit of them. Thankfully, in many instances, we're able to hear it and to catch it before customs has formally constituted an investigation. So we're able to talk our clients into filing a prior disclosure and paying the government what should have rightfully been paid at the time of importation. And thankfully, that avoids the criminal liability for the most part. Customs can still, if they wanted to, get HSI entailed and involved, even with a prior disclosure ongoing when there's criminal implications. So that's important to note, because many think, well, if I tell the man and if I pay everything I should have paid, I'm completely off the hook. And it's like, I can't guarantee that, but I can say in many instances that we've seen, where you do pay the man, you wind up not having an HSI investigation and or a Department of Justice issue and or an arrest thereafter. But there are many instances that Department of Justice has come out with settlements, for example, of 6 million, another 13 million, 1 million, and some of them have to deal with understating invoices or not even disclosing the value of assists and knowing that you have an assist. Like, imagine an assist, which is a complicated issue, which should be added to your actual valuation and should be dutiable. You should be paying duties on it. But how many, if we were to do a poll of all of your viewership, how many know what an assist is, what it should be in play? The majority of the importing public, the smaller businesses that don't have import compliance departments, how many of them know what the hell an assist is? The normal world wouldn't necessarily, but imagine somebody actually is getting penalized and others are actually going to jail. Jail, typically fraud we're talking about for the jail time. So that we're really dealing with, like, our dual set of invoices, horrible. Typically, you wind up dealing with the assist portion. Normally, that's going to be penalty actions and money, not necessarily your freedom.
Well, and that's where the scenario, folks, is we're looking at that. Too often there are people that will, when it comes to setting up a business or doing some kind of family business or law or whatever, they wind up trying to do, go the cheap route. Oh, I don't want to pay an attorney or whatever. And it's like, well, okay, fine. You do a contract or something on something, trying to, be penny wise and pound foolish, as I would say, is that then you get into a scenario there where it costs you more in the long run. Had I just spent a few $100 with an attorney, is this fine? And whatever, put in the right clauses, you're good. In this case, you've got people that are either customs brokers, or they don't want to use a customs broker, or they don't want to use somebody that is a consultant or advisor in an import-export regulatory realm. Oh, I've got this. This is all fine. It makes sense to them to a point, but they don't know the questions to ask until after the fact. And then it's like, oops. And any of us know that if you've got a oops or, oh, you know what, then you're after the fact, and then you're like that pooper scooper at the end of a parade. You're having to call somebody and say, I need some help to clean this thing up. Well, here's the thing. Just like you said, okay, I do a voluntary disclosure. I get this all straightened out. That's good. Or even if you don't, and then it gets discovered, okay, fine, there's that, and you pay the additional duties and you think, okay, that's it. Well, now your importer number is going to have a history that is going to be flagged at some point. So guess what? Any future importations that come in, you more than likely are going to have a higher percentage of shipments stopped for examination than what you would have as an average importer. Why? Because you have shown some nefarious activity, whether it was intentional or not. So that's, your reputation goes a long way, and building that, earning the respect of folks, it takes a while, but it's so easy to lose, isn't it?
For sure. Another fun, valuable lesson is let's not put that in writing. So let's use our fake invoice and let's detail what we're doing via email. This is a great what not to do story. So this one thankfully doesn't start with Florida woman. It's Las Vegas woman. So I'm not sure if you guys saw this, but it was a great what not to do moment where a Las Vegas woman was charged with Iranian sanctions violations. And I'm going to read you a couple of her emails because I think they're just flawlessly, fabulously horrible and a wonderful story of what not to do. The total pricing that I requested is too much. So I received a letter from the shipping company regarding your commercial invoice amount. I gave a good explanation last time, but I can't take any risk for any more. So from now on, I'm going to use 25% and I'm going to take it out of the purchase price on the fake invoice. So if we purchase for $1, then the fake invoice is going to be 25 cents. Okay? Does that work? Awesome. So nice to detail your plan. Now another email. Pay attention. When you send any goods to me, I need you to consider below. Number 1, don't put the real invoice ever. Number 2, include the packing list. Number 3, if possible, put the fake invoice with the low cost, such as $50, under $100, and don't ever write your company's detail or parcel. Only write the sender name and number in case of emergency. Got it? Good. Awesome. Number 3, can you please tell me who's actually going to use the parts? Co-conspirator. Well, this university wants it, but we can't say where it's actually going because it's Iran. Awesome. So we're detailing where the goods are actually going. We're detailing the fake invoices and all. Do you really think the government can't access your computers and your email history? So if you're going to be this brazen, I have another amazing example as well where on a client's commercial invoice, there was a charge for changing the country of origin. Literally, the Chinese supplier was so brazen and so annoyed that they had to update the country of origin in whatever country. So it was change country of origin from China to whatever country was a cost that the supplier put on the actual commercial invoice as a separate line item.
Oh, my stars. So in other words, they not only wanted it done, but to actually change it. So they charged to do that. They charged
for the stickers. They charged for their time. So these are the wonderful what not to do and how not to put this in writing. It's incredible that people are so, I don't know what the word is, because here there's no innocent, there's just schmuck all over the place, but it's this is bad. In all sorts of realms. So not only do I want you to use a fake invoice, but I'm going to detail how to process and how to ensure that we use the fake invoice properly. I'm not going to tell the real suppliers who the actual end user is when they ask me, because why would I tell anybody that instead of going to an actual university, it's really going to Iran? Thanks. It's as brazen can be, and there's so much of it. So there's a lot of what not to do here. I mean, I get, and we see a lot of people having a lot of pain paying that extra 25% on list 1, 2, 3. That's not a pleasure for anyone to have an extra 25% tariff, but there's a reason for this, and it is in existence. So before new exclusions come out and there's no other way to fight, if you're not on board the lawsuit, get on board the lawsuit. Call me if you still want to. We're fighting list 3, we're fighting list 4. That's active and still going on. But having a secondary false invoice, not the freaking answer. Not now, not ever. I beg of you, don't do it.
Well, it's one of those things I got to say, people work harder to get out of work than just doing the work sometimes. And it's meaning that in this case, with all the things they're trying to do and circumvent, the sanctions and circumvent the duties and taxes and doing all that kind of stuff. It's okay. Let me clarify something. It's okay to look at ways to see if you can avoid paying high duties and taxes legally. But it is not okay to say, well, here it is. And then they're like, well, that's still too high. So I'm going to undervalue it, or I'm going to do something different. It's like, no, you can't do that. And just think it's also a scenario where, even if you get away with it, which a lot of people do initially and all that, it could be 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. And that comes up, and guess what? You're busted. So the scenario there is that, do you want to be constantly worrying that customs or somebody is going to, knock on your door or do something? And no, it's not worth the risk. You just do it right. Cross your T's, dot your I's, and get it done.
100%. 100%. And I don't see it in that regard, but there's a lot of people that'll do anything to save a buck. And that part stinks, because now you have to reform. How do you reform somebody like that? It's difficult in those realms. I mean, your investigation's already ongoing. And in regards to the legal opportunities and legal ways to try to save, like some people, especially in South Florida, for example, we've got a big transit hub where goods are coming in, but going to Latin America. So we're using foreign trade zones, bonded warehouses. There are other creative ways to not pay customs duties if you're, for example, importing for export. And some 98 provisions to look at. There's maybe duty drawback thereafter. So there are potentially other options to look into. And if there aren't, you just got to pay the man.
I got it. Well, all said and done, I guess we need to look at this as that it is worthwhile to do the due diligence based on what we've seen. Due diligence means that check out who you're doing business with, whether it's domestically or internationally. I mean, I got to tell you, there's some situations that, domestically you look at it, is this somebody that's got a good reputation, that they may be a distributor or wholesaler or whatever. Okay, well, where are they getting their goods from? Because there are situations you've got to track down where these goods are coming from, especially even on a whole nother realm we didn't even bring up. But it's like, okay, if you've got any product that it contains wood, well, that's the Lacey Act. And that's with that Lacey Act, where's the species, where's it from, and all that. So checking out who you're doing business with, the products you're looking at, does it comply, whether you're sourcing it domestically or internationally? And third, don't cut corners. Just, do it right. If you can't afford the duties and taxes, then don't do the transaction, because it's not worth, going to jail or having a substantial penalty or something like that. Would that be a good summary?
I love it. And a lot of those are in our top 10 tips. So lots more there as well. And I beg of you, use your correct value. And if you can't do the business, then you got to think of another one. It's not a good one for you. There's so many different ways to make money in this country. We're very, very fortunate to have lots and lots of avenues to use our professions and to go back to school and get another education and to rebrand and rethink about something else. I mean, at the end of the day, if you can't make a buck doing what it is you're doing and doing it legally, it's just not worth it.
Well, and
at
also,
that stage, I'm not going to be the one to help you. It's going to be somebody else.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I was going to say also make sure that you test your product. If it's coming in, if it's some kind of food product or some kind of ointment or some kind, whatever it is, test to make sure not only your samples are on the front end, but then ongoing is make sure that you are getting, somebody hasn't, it's like once they get things rolling and say, everything's looking fine. All right, we've got them. And then they change the ingredients unbeknownst to you, and it's still coming in. You're still held liable if you're an importer. So it's like, continue to test. And if you see a problem, then you can stop it and go, hey, FDA or whoever's like, we just discovered a problem, and letting you know we're pulling this back because we haven't distributed it, but I'm taking steps to say, this isn't good. That's a scenario where you avoid getting penalized and avoids like, we just discovered something, right?
You gain some credibility there by being proactive instead of reactive, for sure. It's not the government notifying you that there's an issue. It's you being proactive, for sure. a different standpoint and you taking measures to correct the issue. Lalo?
No, I was just going to say, now I am going to be the bad guy. I know you need to go on, Jen. So I'll let you wrap up. And by the way, not last episode, but the very first episode you were on, we did put a link to that top 10 list. I'm going to re-put it. Well, perfect English. Repost it on the show notes for this episode. So.
Hey, folks, I'm going to tell you, Jen Diaz and her law firm are worth checking out. I know you're not doing an advertisement with us, Jen, but it's like, seriously, she is somebody that is very well respected in the industry. If you got questions, I'm sure reaching out to Jen and her team, they can at least get back to you and tell you if you need further legal advice or point you in the right direction. Is what I call bird dogging on an issues. Like Jen would be a great resource. So,
thank you, Andy. It's always a pleasure talking to you and Lalo. I love it.
Well, that's
awesome.
great.
Well, thank you so much.
You, folks like you are one of the main reasons I think our show is doing so well. And again, to our listeners, thank you so much for what you're doing. Please share this, like it, especially if you like what you're hearing here and want more of this. Can reach out to Jen, definitely, but I hope you reach out to myself and Lalo and the show and help us promote the show. We are approaching new milestones with as our listenership continues to expand. I hope you share our show. And then people will subscribe. So, we need your support on that. And we thank you for what you've been doing. So.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure. Look forward to the next one. What are we going to talk about next?
Yeah, let's figure it out.
Dun, 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 dun. Have a great day, folks.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show or would like to sponsor Simply Trade or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.